Item number 2 is a communication from Mayor Weinberger and Chief Del Pozo regarding an update on the investigation of Kilburn death with a potential expected executive session. First, would like to recognize Councilor Paulino.
Thank you, President Wright. So, for the record, for those of you who don't know, I'm employed as a Deputy State's Attorney, and as in that employment, our office have some involvement in this investigation. Therefore, I have requested to recuse from this.
Right. Thank you, Councilor Paulino. Councilor Paulino has recused himself.
Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, do you want to start this out and turn to the City Attorney?
That's right, President Wright. Thank you. First of all, welcome back to service, City Attorney Eileen Blackwood, who is her first day back after being out for a bit. Yeah, missed her, and we're excited her back. She's back, and she was going to have some opening remarks for her.
So, this is a matter that is on your agenda for expected executive session. I thought it made a little sense to kind of set the stage about some of that. So, first of all, this issue arose because it is a routine matter for the Burlington Police Department when there is any kind of use of force that's fairly major, or in this case where there was a death resulting, that as a result of because of the death resulting here, this matter was referred to the state police for investigation. This happened before there was any involvement by the medical examiner or anything like that, and I think it's important to understand that the investigation by the state police is totally separate from anything that went on around the medical examiner's report. So, and that it is fairly routine that we refer matters all the time to the state police to do an investigation. When the state police investigate, that matter is all within their investigatory authority, and they decide what is public, what is not, how that process happens. And so far, they have told us that the matter is currently under investigation, and that there is nothing we can publicly release about it. When they complete their investigation, it then comes back to the city, and the city will then conduct its own internal investigation, kind of for employment purposes, that kind of thing, looking at. And so at this point, nobody from the city has any comments about what the officer did or didn't do in terms of making judgments about that. That is yet to come. That is all stuff that's going to happen after the state police investigation has completed. So I wanted to be sure everybody was aware of that investigation is ongoing, it's happening, and it is a fairly routine matter that we would, in a case like this, refer to the state police. The second part of this matter that has come forward for folks is that the chief got brought into this matter because the medical examiner called him. And I'm not sure that fact has really been made very clear here, but that what happened is the medical examiner called him and reported to him that he was about to make a finding about this death, and these are not the medical examiner's words, but my words, but that finding was somewhat unusual. And that finding was that he couldn't really find the cause of death or the mechanics of how the death occurred, but that he was deciding that the manner of death was a homicide. And when he called the chief and to discuss this and to tell him about it, the chief had a lot of questions, and I think that's really what has led everything to where it is. What I wanted to say, though, is that the city attorney's office was consulted. As you know, Justin St. James was acting city attorney, and he was consulted and involved in this, and the city attorney's office was involved in what communications occurred after that once these questions arose about, hey, wait a second, this is a really unusual finding. What does it mean? How can you reach that kind of a conclusion? And then steps were taken to ask those questions through the appropriate channels to find out what happened. City Attorney's Office has reviewed the actions taken by the Mayor's Office and by the Chief, and has no concerns about how those things unfolded, that those things went through the chain of command, and that they occurred in a way that was not inconsistent with the advice they were receiving from the City Attorney's Office. Beyond that, and what has been written out in the public, if you have questions about what has been written in the media, that's out in the media and that's public. But beyond that, to go much further into any of the details about this investigation or what happened during this incident, we would need to go into executive session to do that because those are those are all part of the ongoing investigation and the investigation that the city will still have to be doing once the state police investigation is concluded. So I wanted to be sure that everybody was kind of clear about that. It depends a little bit on what your questions are and what you want to know, but that the majority of the substance of this would need to be discussed in executive session.
Thank you, City Attorney Blackwood. So you've heard what the city attorney has had to say about this. Are there any questions that are, I guess it would have to be extremely generic about what was in the press? Anything beyond that would have to go in executive session?
Probably.
Are there any questions that, Councilor Pine?
Yeah, I guess my question is, as people elected to represent our constituents, what we're trying to balance is the need to provide as much information as possible to the public, respecting the process and the investigation, but yet also not feel like we're preventing the public from access to critical information about what happened. So this is putting us in an incredibly difficult position to have us view the footage in a private executive session, have information, and then not be able to have conversations with our constituents after that. So we don't know how long the investigation will take. It could take a matter of days, but it could also take a matter of weeks, I think. We don't know, right? It'll take however long it takes to do it, right? So there's no deadline. So if we watch the video and in 3 or 4 days it's public and then it gets out, it's not that big a deal if we watched it. But if in 5, 6 weeks, 2 months from now, the public still hasn't had a chance to see what occurred, you're putting us in a very difficult position, I feel, by having us go through this footage ourselves. So I'm not sure as counselors what we gain by that. Can you give me some rationale for doing it that way?
It's not necessarily my idea that you view the video.
Clear.
The video.
We're not putting, it's not the administration isn't putting you through this. The administration stands ready to share information that we have that is not public information, and that as a policy, we consistently have, when asked by counselors, share privileged, confidential information. And that's what we stand ready to do if the council wants it. We're ready if that is what the council would like. But there, and a further point here that's I think worth noting, the city, in terms of the withholding of the body cam footage, it is not the city's policy that is withholding the body cam footage. That is being withheld really inconsistently with the city's policies regarding body cam footage, but because it is the policy of the state police and something that the Attorney General's office has requested, that is not being withheld. So I think that is from our perspective, is why we're here tonight. We're trying to be responsive to requests from city councilors. And
just to add to that, Councilor Pine, hold on just a minute, Councilor Jang, I'll go to you. I received a request from Councilor Jang for this report from the chief and from the mayor. And also Councilor Tracy asked for it as well. Councilor Jang made clear that if this needed to be an executive session, that he was fine with that. I said that I want as much information to be public as possible, but that was before getting information about that this is just, that it will have to be an executive session to go any further. So I think it now is up to the council, as the mayor indicated and the city attorney has indicated. The councilors have asked for this report. It needs to be done in executive session. If you've got further questions that go any further than this basic, I think it's been made pretty clear what needs to happen, and it's really now up to council. Councilor Jang has his hand up first, actually.
Thank you, and welcome back. Yeah, so I think it is important for us to set the tone here. We are not asking any questions about the investigation itself. One, even the title on Modoc, it's not a request. What we requested was very specific. We want to hear from both the mayor and the chief of police as to why they got involved into this matter. That's what we want to. We have questions. I have questions, and many councils have questions. And that's what we need to ask you about. Personally, the footage, I don't want to see it because it's part of an investigation. But I have questions for you, whether we can do it into executive session or do it in public. and I would prefer the public, because the public, many people have so many questions and concerns, and we need those questions to be answered. I think it's important to set the tone. That's what we want to talk about.
Councilor Tracy?
That's not that much of a vote hearing.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to call on Councilor Busher, and then we'll go next.
So, my being here for this part of the agenda was not really to view the footage of but was to better understand what I see, what I hear, and what I've read about some issues that, like this, that the state or the governor is having issues with our involvement, and I just don't, I feel like obviously there's a difference of opinion about how we have conducted ourselves in this process versus how other people see how we've conducted ourselves. I'd really like to understand that better and have a chance for the administration and the chief to respond to that. That's out in the media, and I don't totally understand that friction. So, thank you.
Are you asking for a response, Councilor Busher?
Well, I thought that we were trying to get things out, and so whether that's appropriate to have an open session, I think it is. I think that if the mayor and the chief are comfortable, I would prefer to understand that friction that's being reported.
Is that appropriate for executive session? I mean, for open session?
I think that depends a little bit on the extent to which the questions want to go. The problem is that answering some of the questions has to get into the underlying facts about what occurred. So that's a piece of the problem.
Mr. Mayor?
Certainly from my perspective, the chief and I have been questioned again and again by members of the media as has been public about what the actions that took place here. And we have shared as much as we can about that because there is an active investigation in which the Attorney General, and this was just reiterated in the media over the weekend, the Attorney General does not want the facts of the case discussed any further, and there really isn't any way for us to say any more about our actions without getting into those facts. And that is why we have consistently, for a better part of a week now, said, yes, there's a difference of opinion, and that's what it is, a difference of opinion about the actions here. And I think reasonable people, when all the information is known, will understand the questions and the concerns the chief and I had and the actions that we took. And what we are offering to do here tonight is the council, if you would like to, can understand what those questions and concerns were. But they would have to be in executive session for us to say more about it.
So I'm going to entertain a couple more questions, but I really don't want to spend all this time going back and forth about, are we going to go into executive session or are we not going to go into executive session? I think it's a waste of time. The city attorney is making clear that we need to go into executive session to go any further with this. I want to point out one thing. When we talk about that this is going to be difficult on our constituents, yes it is, but this is what we do. I mean, we had city place issues, and we got information in executive session, and we had to hold on to that for a while. And that was not coming out as quickly as we would like to on that one either. And so I know the sensitivity around this, but this is what we do. So, Councilor Shannon?
I just thought it'd be helpful to get kind of the questions out on the table before we go into executive session. And my concerns are maybe a little bit different. I'm actually concerned about what, and I don't have executive session information, I'm just talking about what I'm reading in 7 days. And what it says is terminal mechanisms that may explain his death include cardiac dysrhythmia, seizure, and/or respiratory distress, each of which Mr. Kilburn has experienced in the past or has risk factors for. But despite the inability to define the mechanisms, Mr. Kilburn's death was due to a combination of his underlying health issues, one of which is recent trauma. And there was I had seen on a CIX report, there's a list of all the different contributing factors to this death. And then there was a determination of homicide, which means, I believe it means somebody killed this person, and that somebody seems to be being blamed on our city employee, a police officer. This same thing could have happened, and it could have been somebody other than a police officer. It could have been a good Samaritan who steps into a situation to try and calm somebody down, gets punched, punches back, and the next thing you know, this person is accused of homicide according to the decisions being made by the medical examiner. And there's been a lot of attention about the fact that the police chief and the mayor stepped in to question this kind of result. And I think in this case, they stepped into question because it's a city employee, our police officer, that's involved in this. But there was something else that I read that said, and I think it might have been somebody from the governor's office said, well, this should be determined by the attorney general. So I'm just wondering if not for the police chief and the mayor, where's the appropriate checks and balances in this system? When you see something that does not look right, that doesn't really make sense to the layperson looking at this, how do you address that? How do you rectify this? Who is it that is supposed to be questioning this? You know, is there a problem with the mayor and the police chief questioning it? If it were somebody else in the community, what other process is there to get answers to these questions, to have somebody take a second look at what happened?
I can probably take a stab at answering some of that. If there were a report that came out and said homicide, someone's responsible for this death, and it were an unknown person, there were no perpetrator named, then what would happen is the police and the state's attorney's office would get involved in trying to find who the person was, and then through some legal process, there would be a legal process through which there could be challenges made by, if a person was identified and they had a lawyer, that person would start raising a lot of the same concerns that have been being raised. How did you get there? What happened with it? And that is how it would happen. But generally, because it wouldn't otherwise really usually be a way that anyone who cared would be seeing the report and learning about it.
But
until there's
if
a
you
person.
have something that looks like the report in and of itself is being questioned, yes, I think once you have a determination that it's homicide, you're going to look for who caused homicide. Says some other person caused this person to die, and blames it not on the cardiac issues or the respiratory issues or the 3 other issues, each of which could individually have caused this person's death, and it says that we don't know which of these issues causes the person's death, but we're going to accuse somebody of causing the death anyway. Is there not kind of an oversight process within the chain of command, like to have somebody review that report to make sure that it's done correctly? I mean, are there other cases where you have all of these things and you have it stated we can't determine the cause of death, and yet, and I understand there's kind of 2 columns here, all of the contributing factors and then the manner of death, which is odd terminology to me. I don't really understand that, but that's where the homicide comes in. And how do you, you know, what's the chain of command to look at that to make sure it's done correctly? And are there other cases like this where you have all of these contributing factors and it's blamed on one person and an incident that happened days before? I mean, how common is that in the medical examiner community? Do we know?
I don't know. My understanding is this finding, as it was, is quite unusual. the way that it came out. How many other findings there are where the death is indeterminate, I don't know.
Can we get that information from the medical examiner to understand, like, how we got to where we are with this accusation?
There certainly, I think, are many other steps we could take if we want to go further in understanding this.
Because I would think it would be a concern to the public, that they could be accused of homicide in a situation like this, where somebody has all of these underlying issues, and in an act of self-defense.
Councilor Jang has a point of order. Councilor Jang has a point of order.
Yeah, so I think what we're talking about here is whether we go into executive session or not to dig into the details about the findings.
There's no
Well,
motion on the table.
I'll make that. There has been no motion yet made to go into executive session. That is an open question as to whether the council is going to make that motion. I hope that if it's going to happen, we leave some time for it, because the time is moving closer to 7 o'clock. Councilor Shannon, I do, if we were upstairs, we wouldn't be going back and forth to this extent, so do you have anything further?
I'll just leave it at that, but I just want to, get those concerns out there, and if there is more information that could come forth to the council about the, is this a normal course of action for a medical examiner to take? I think that would be helpful for us to know.
Councilor Tracy and then Councilor Freeman.
So, part of my reason why I joined Councilor Dang in asking for this was wanting a fuller public accounting of why exactly the intervention took place, and that was how I understood this particular situation, or this particular session to be about, was really that question of why both the mayor and mayor's staff intervened, as well as the chief and the medical examiner's finding, and why, specifically, why not wait until after that finding is out there to challenge that? I mean, that seems to be, at least in my opinion, a more fair way, a more transparent way about addressing a situation, as opposed to trying to challenge the finding privately, as well as the timing of its release, and to contact the governor and the governor's staff on that. So I'm wondering, why not wait until the finding is released to the public to challenge it, seek second opinions, have that conversation, and then also, if you had it to do over again, would you do the same thing? Would you intervene again and ask for the treatment of the situation that you did again?
So I think this is a question that's been answered multiple times by both the chief and I publicly. The chief seems ready to answer it again and restate what has been said.
That's a fair question. I think if, to understand the reason why I contacted Dr. Levine before the results were made public is because if it could be explained to me in a way that made sense and accorded with my understanding of the death certification process, I didn't want to challenge that finding in public in a way that would seem like I was impugning the credibility of the evidence that the medical examiner intended to introduce. So the attempt was not to wait until it was a public sparring about matters of evidence and standards of proof, but to say, if this is how it's going to stand, and you could explain it in a way that, granted a layperson, but who has a pretty good understanding can understand, then that's that, right? Then there's no need to engage in some sort of dispute in public, and that would probably be healthier for the legitimacy of our institutions, right? It didn't come to that. It didn't work out that way.
So I guess though, that didn't answer sort of the second piece of it. Right. Would you choose to act the same way again? Would you think that this is a justifiable sort of conduct moving forward, or this is a policy that you think that we should engage with as a department on a regular basis, or do you think that we should let?
It's a very unusual set of circumstances, and I think it's very hard to project that into the future. These things coming together this way. Certainly, again, I think you've heard from the city attorney tonight. Everything that was done in consultation with the city attorney's office. The city attorney's office has said there are no concerns about the actions that were taken, and I think when the matter is fully before the public and can be talked about openly again, I believe reasonable people will understand the actions that we took and the questions and concerns that we had. So I think that's about all I can say.
Coming out of this, it's pretty clear that there is, pretty significant force that was used in this situation. Are you open to a full and complete review of the police, the Burlington Police Department's use of force policy?
Yes. I intend to do that.
And what does that look like to you?
I'd like the police commission and citizen, meaning citizen not in the legal sense, but the review of the community and having their input as well. I think we had before I got here, a long set of use of force policies. It was Chief Shirling put into one. And what we've done is actually our training, although the results are our training has actually outpaced the writing of the policy in certain ways. We're finding ourselves in situations sometimes where officers act outside of the guidance of their training, but we can't take affirmative action because the policy hasn't been updated. So you follow, and this is not opining on this incident. I'm saying in general, we have a need to do that. I intend to do it, and I'd welcome participation from the community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Tracy. Councilor Freeman?
Yeah, I think I have sort of it sounds, what has been expressed is, I think we've been talking about the strength of our institutions, and to me, I understand it that the medical examiners, that they ruled that it's a homicide. And it sounds like what's sort of being at times presented as a question over the validity of that ruling and the strength of that institution's ability to sort of provide our community and our with sort of facts and sort of like a legal sort of integrity. And I'm just very confused, and I would really like to have some clarity about why the strength of that institution and their integrity is even sort of remotely even being questioned in this circumstance.
So this is a place where I feel like we're getting into the details of the, what happened.
Thank you, Councilor Freeman. So I would like the council to make a decision. If someone wants to go into executive session, I would like the councilor to make that motion. And if not, then we will begin to wind this down and move upstairs.
Would the purpose of the executive...
Councilor Shannon?
Sorry. The purpose of the executive session be to view the body cam footage or
I think
for
that the
more
purpose
questions?
of the executive session would be for further answers to be given to us in executive session that the mayor and the chief have indicated would compromise the investigation, but that they could tell us an investigation in executive session, and the council could decide to view the webcam, the video cam, or not. Councilors are talking about wanting to review the policy. Obviously, we have not watched the video cam, so I don't know how we can decide whether appropriate force was used or inappropriate force was used. But that's up to the council. So.
Can I ask one question related to the body cam footage, which is?
Yes, and then I really would like to be a motion or a decision made whether we're going to executive session or not.
If we don't view the body cam footage tonight, when would it be available to us or to the public?
We don't know the answer to.
Or would it be available?
Eventually, we expect it will be, once the investigation is complete and the state police have released it, unless there is another barrier that I'm not aware of at the moment, then I believe that it would then be available.
Upon conclusion of proceedings, so when it's no longer held as evidence by the state police, the state attorney general, or the state's attorney is when we'd be free to release it.
And did you say, or is it true that the Attorney General has also advised that this needs to, none of this information needs to go any further?
Yes, I heard directly from the Attorney General that he's concerned about discussion of the evidence in this case. That's why he called me, as was reported, to discourage discussion, public discussion of the evidence.
As you may know, there is a public records request pending in the court, a case about release of the video, and the state police have given us an affidavit indicating that they believe that it is confidential and needs to not be released. So that's currently where it stands from our perspective.
Okay, so it's 7 o'clock, and we have spent all of our time talking about whether we're going to executive session or not, and not actually gone in and gotten any additional information. Does anybody want to make a motion to go into executive session to get additional information from the chief and the mayor? Councilor Busher?
President Wright, may I ask, I have a desire to have one piece of information, and I'm not sure it needs executive session or not, but before you end this.
Put it out there, Councilor Busher.
What I believe is was confusing to the chief initially, is still confusing to the public and to the council potentially, is the definition of medical homicide versus homicide. And I think that my understanding was medical homicide can be the conclusion of a number of contributing factors can lead to a medical homicide death, which is different than just a plain homicide. And so I feel like we have only added mud to the water tonight with all these cameras here, talking once again about homicide. And I think that there is a difference, and I think that's what the medical examiner was trying to distinguish. And so I wondered if that could be once again clarified for everybody, so that we don't leave this session with that's the wrong takeaway.
Good point, Councilor Busher. I don't know if the mayor or the chief wants to address that, because I assume that what I've heard is that a homicide is not a murder, but that another person may have caused the death of another person, and the investigation is to whether it is a justifiable homicide. But,
Yeah, I don't see how to answer that question without getting into questions about the standards that the medical examiner used in making the determination, and that brings us into the discussion in question.
Right. I think, okay.
All right, so sorry, I just thought that maybe we could just end with a clarification
That was a
as
good
opposed
question,
to.
and I think it's a good clarification that a homicide does not mean a murder was committed. And the investigation is going to determine whether it was a justifiable homicide or not. Correct? I mean, that's the investigation, and we won't go any further. Are we set to go upstairs? Okay, I am closing out item number 2.
Should we recess?
Yes, we should recess this meeting, regular meeting, and we will reconvene upstairs.